on to smart investing. It used to be a matter of knowing the right advisors and who had the best market insights or instinct or both. Now we live in the age of data analytics, and AI can consider far more data points than any human or previous computer systems. Let's ask our next guest how this changes the art of investing yet again, and what impact we can expect on private markets, as well as the entire world economies. Actually, the program was so packed for today, and then there came Daniel, and Steffi told me, Alessia, we need to have this session because it will be one of those DLD moments which we are always raving about, that Mark Zuckerberg has been here when he only had 2 million users, or BioNTech was long before, COVID at DLD. And she told me, Alessia, don't be so German. We have to have Daniel because this is one of those DLD stories. So I'm so excited that you made it. And for all of you, you first saw it at DLD. Please give a warm hand of applause to Daniel Schmidt, the founder of CEPRES. And also our dear friend, Jan, who joined us to moderate the session, to guide the discussion. Jan is a former board member of the Hypovereinsbank. So the two of you, we are so excited to have you. Please give a warm hand of applause for them.
Thank you, Alessia, for the introduction and actually for having us. So, Daniel, we got to know each other yesterday evening, actually.
You're a young team.
And we're discussing a little bit your exciting business. And we both started off in banking. Is looking at us, you can tell. We both started off in banking, while I stayed on until recently, end of last year. You decided 15 years ago to actually move on, to become a founder, an entrepreneur. You founded CEPRES. Tell us why. I mean, you can imagine why you left banking, but tell us why you actually founded and what was the idea behind it.
So at that time, thanks a lot, Jan, for that introduction. I was working for the private equity group of a large bank, and actually what we did day for day, we were moving capital around the world into private equity, private infrastructure, private debt. It was a growing space. I saw that growth, but I was believing that we don't do this on a very deep knowledge basis. And I was wondering why. And the reason was that there was no information available about the assets where we finally indirectly invest on. And in investing means having the knowledge to know what you do. And I realized at that point of time, 15 years ago already, that information knowledge is very closely linked to data and data availability. And I went to my boss and said, look, I think have to reinvent the way how we invest into that space. And he said, Daniel, and it will be a data-driven approach, I told him. And he said, Daniel, we are a bank here. We are not an online business. We are not a data business.
Sounds familiar.
So I did it myself, and I found wonderful partners who had shared the same vision, and we grow that company together since then.
Pretty cool. Tell us maybe very briefly what you actually did since then, what you built and how you built it.
Yeah. Maybe I show a few slides then as well to help with that understanding. I don't go through a presentation, but just a few slides. The idea was actually, so on the one hand, we have different actors in that game. We have the large pension plans, life insurances, banks, more and more sovereigns, the topic of today, who invest into private markets. Everything what is not traded on exchanges, not publicly traded. And this happens usually via fund managers who invest that funds into assets, into deals. But finally, the allocators who allocate that money into that space didn't really have that information. Where finally is my money ending up? What are the assets I'm indirectly owning? But the so-called channel partners, which are the fund managers who own that investments, have that information. It's just not centrally managed that the party who finally is the end investor who has the capital also receives that information. It's a confidentiality topic, and there are other reasons why. But I arranged a network around the globe between these limited partners and channel partners to share that data on a permission basis. And so we grew the largest data network of the world out of Munich, actually. Today it's a global company. and enable. We, by the way, also invited advisors, consultants, other actors in that game. But at the end, we have that information now where it should be, enabling them to make sophisticated decisions. You see, that is the growth of data which we have. So we are running today on 180,000 deals which are on that platform. And maybe that is the most interesting one. These are the capital flows behind the network. You see how the world is connected and how they today share via our platform data on their investments which they do. Thank
now, that's pretty exciting. Now, I think the headline is AI, private markets, and the geopolitical race ahead. I would say since the discussion of the last 2.5 days, probably the race we are already in, deeply. So how does this fit together? AI, your concept, and also the geopolitical race. What is the driver? What do you see?
Maybe we start with the latter one, the geopolitical race. The geopolitical race ahead, that's the title of today, right? So what happened, and it started finally with the pandemic, with COVID, that we realized we are very depending on others. Supply chains suddenly broke. We came into a situation now where the geopolitical tension is massively increasing. We have even wars, and we realize that us as a nation, as countries, and others as well, everybody for himself realizes we are absolutely depending on others. But this was an effect of the globalization. But what they all think about is now to reduce that dependency on others and get more independent, which finally means they need to spend money investing into assets which give us that independence in the future. And if you're looking to the world of assets available, there is just a small portion really traded on exchanges, publicly traded. We have about 200 million companies which are not traded and 60,000 which are traded on the exchanges. So what is the space a government and sovereign has to invest in when you want to control and get access and maybe even own, if it's not otherwise possible, these assets? It's the illiquid space. So the geopolitical tension forces nations, sovereigns, governments to invest into private markets. And we get a new actor in that game who is now suddenly looking for assets in that space and deploys it in different ways, via private equity, private infrastructure funds, but also directly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you possess is super precious data. It is, I mean, as a banker, I could only dream of this. Now, also talking about banking, I think my experience would be in a large organization like a bank, these data would be available in a file cabinet in like big folders, or at best in like PDF files sorted somewhere in a digital file. Now, I'm sure you did differently. And what is the role of AI you really see now, and how could this progress further?
Maybe, by the way, I have to say, when I started that, I just knew that data has a value. And I was believing that it's the charting or whatever which helps us as human beings to analyze these flows better and things. Today, fortunately, AI came up and made a completely different game out of the data value which we have generated. But at the end, if we're going back to this topic about nations, about governments, sovereigns who are forced to give speed by investing into different areas, the question is, what do they solve for? They don't want just to solve for return and risk, which is the classical investment KPIs, where you would look in a bank to. They need to solve for jobs, for healthcare security, for defense, for maybe technological leadership, which they want to control in the future. So the KPIs in an investment process where they need to look to becomes more and more difficult to analyze. And so the AI helps to understand the data and drive capitals. And we have a small video, maybe we just start that. It starts with some KPIs in the ESG sector. Yeah? So we're looking to investments which a state might have access to in the classical way. Now, that is the classical way how in the past we would have looked to that data. Today, and we're starting now the AI, we are prompting the AI to tell us, please have a look through all investments which I could have access to, and analyze me those which have the highest national interest or which support our national interest, which we do now. We start the AI. You won't see it maybe, but finally, we talk with the AI, please help us to look into this data network where, and I have to say, the owner of these companies need to give permission that the other party can see this, but they have a big interest that they see it. So they have an interest that the sovereign wealth fund has access to that information because they might become a buyer of their companies. And so what we do now, we ask the AI, please analyze all these companies where I have access to give me, on the one hand, concrete companies where I could invest in, plus they have to be aligned with our ESG, with our clean energy, with our ESG guidelines we as a state have. And the AI runs through the data behind and finally finds all these companies and obviously shows it to the sovereign. And not only that it identifies the companies, the next prompt is, please identify me who's the owner of that companies. Who can I approach that I can buy these companies? And the AI finds that.
I think this is super relevant for parts of the things we discussed. Yesterday we had a big opening with, I think, the Bavarian Prime Minister and half of his cabinet. Unheard of, which were making, I think, a super bold statement about strategic allocation and strategic positioning of Bavaria in the European context. And this morning we had this very serious discussion about defense, and you saw the colleagues sitting here debating how to allocate capital and how to come up with really tangible investment decisions for states. Now, this perfectly, I think, fits into what you have been discussing, because the big question out there, if you want to have a company which does anti-drone warfare, you need to understand who's out there. You have 160,000, I think, single assets analyzed in this whole thing, and 24,000 funds. So how could you help? How does this tool help for these strategic asset allocation decisions and going forward?
So obviously the 160,000, it's 180,000 in the meanwhile, so it's growing every day actually, that data set, but it depends on also, it's a counterparty network as more owners of companies, which is in our world, the private equity funds, the private infrastructure funds, they are permitting others to look to that data. So that number is growing massively. And finally, when we are looking, and that is maybe a chart where not every nation, not every sovereign has the same targets. Defense is now the title of everything, but finally it's also about health. It's about other technological leadership, right? So the focus is very broad. And what you see here is for the whole world, and we separate that later if we have time into different states and countries. But what you see is, I don't know whether you can see, it's a bit not nice to see, but finally it shows industries where we identified geopolitically relevant companies behind. So, and this is investments that happened by private equity funds. And on the y-axis, you see the returns they have achieved. On the x-axis, you see the multiples which are getting paid, so the valuations. And that is an interesting chart because it finally shows the valuations are today not only driven by financial metrics, a kind of multiple approach, it's highly driven as well by geopolitical and strategic value an asset has for a certain buyer group. So if private equity funds are investing into these spaces, they already have in mind that their exit can happen for a much higher value because an asset has a geopolitical relevance, right? And so if I flip through a little bit and we drill down in, that is the industries which are getting bought because of geopolitical interests. And if you go, for example, now into the US, that is deals done in the US. Software and technology has always a high strategical interest. That is securing our future to be business leaders. That is a no-go. But if you go, for example, now into Asia, you see that they pay a massive price for payment technology, payment systems. That is an infrastructure which is in ownership at the moment of the Western countries, of mainly the US, and you see how fast that can be switched off. And therefore, what we see here, when we look deeper into the data, are interesting geopolitical interests which drive capital flows of the future. And we enable, with our infrastructure, everybody is invited to use that technology and get access to that data, permissioned data, to solve for their individual targets.
I think this is super exciting. We run out of time, but this is super exciting because, I mean, you basically see capital flows going into strategic assets, and you can be sure that private equity and other funds will follow that. So this is a pretty cool predictive tool for understanding what's happening in the world in terms of capital allocation for strategic purposes. Cool.
Thanks a lot.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
It was almost like in a movie. These two guys with their white shirts and these slim guys and changing. And it's a cool thing what we just saw. It's the beginning. I feel it's kind of Palantir of financial data or something like this. Something very cool. I think we will hear more about it. I smell it. Not in real time, but you know.